The sledgehammer crashed into the concrete, sending chunks flying across Marcus' backyard. 20 years of memories shattered with each swing. But as the dust settled, he saw her, Karen from next door, standing at the fence with her phone pressed to her ear, a twisted smile spreading across her face. "Yes, officer, I would like to report a destruction of property." What she did not know was that Marcus had been waiting for this moment his entire life. The pool was just the beginning point. Marcus Rivera wiped the sweat from his forehead as he surveyed the destruction in his backyard. The kidney-shaped pool that had dominated the space for 2 decades now lay in ruins, concrete chunks scattered like broken teeth across the yellowing grass. His shoulders ached from 3 days of demolition work, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache in his chest. "Daddy's pool is gone," he whispered to the empty yard, his voice catching on the words. 6 months ago, his 8-year-old daughter Sophia would have been splashing in those waters, her laughter echoing off the fence that separated his property from the Hendersons next door. Now the pool was just another casualty of the divorce, another piece of the life he had built that had crumbled beyond repair. The custody agreement was clear every other weekend, but Elena had already started making excuses, finding reasons why Sophia could not come over. "The pool is too dangerous," she had said during their last phone call. "What if something happens when you are not watching?" The irony was not lost on him. Elena had been the one having an affair while he worked 60-hour weeks to pay for their dream house. Marcus grabbed his water bottle from the patio table and took a long drink, trying to push down the familiar rage that threatened to surface. Dr. Martinez had warned him about this during their last therapy session. "Anger is just grief wearing a disguise," she had said. "Let yourself feel it, but do not let it control you." A sharp knock at the front door interrupted his thoughts. Marcus glanced at his watch, 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. He was not expecting anyone. He made his way through the house, noting how empty it felt without Sophia's drawings on the refrigerator or her sneakers scattered by the front door. Through the peephole, he saw a police officer standing on his front porch. Young woman with auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression professional but wary. Behind her, at the edge of his driveway, stood Karen Henderson. Marcus' jaw tightened. Karen had been a thorn in his side for 3 years, ever since she and her husband Bob had moved in next door. She was the type of neighbor who measured grass height with a ruler and called the homeowner association if your trash can was visible from the street for more than 12 hours. But this felt different, this felt personal. He opened the door, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Officer Rodriguez," she replied, consulting her notepad. "I am responding to a complaint about property destruction. Are you Marcus Rivera?" "I am." He stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "What seems to be the problem?" Karen stepped forward before the officer could respond, her thin lips pressed into a righteous line. "The problem is that your illegal demolition project is affecting my property values and creating a safety hazard. There are concrete chunks flying into my yard, and you do not have proper permits." Marcus felt that familiar heat rising in his chest. "Karen, it is my property. I can do whatever I want with my pool." "Actually, sir," Officer Rodriguez interjected, "we need to verify that you have the proper permits for this type of demolition work. Depending on the size and scope of the project, you may need approval from the city." "It is just a pool," Marcus said, but even as the words left his mouth, he realized how naive they sounded. In his grief and anger, he had not even considered permits. He just wanted the damn thing gone, wanted to erase every reminder of the life he had lost. Karen's smile was sharp as a blade. "Officer, I have been documenting this for 3 days. He has been using heavy machinery without proper safety protocols. My property line is less than 6 feet from where he is working, and I have young grandchildren who visit. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen." Marcus stared at his neighbor, seeing her clearly for the first time. This was not about property values or safety, this was about power. Karen had watched his life fall apart over the past year, the divorce, Elena moving out, the fights that had occasionally spilled into the backyard where anyone could hear. She had seen him at his lowest point, and now she was kicking him while he was down. "I will need to see your permits, Mr. Rivera," Officer Rodriguez said, her tone apologetic but firm. "If you do not have them, I am afraid you will need to stop all work until you can get proper approval from the city." How long does that take? Marcus asked, though he already dreaded the answer. Could be anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, depending on the project scope, the officer replied. You will need to submit plans, possibly have an environmental impact assessment done since you are dealing with a pool removal. Karen's victory was written all over her face. Officer, what about the mess he has already created? Those concrete chunks in my yard. Marcus' vision tunneled. 6 weeks, 6 weeks of looking at the half-destroyed pool, of being reminded every day of his failures, of Karen's smug satisfaction, 6 weeks of feeling trapped in his own backyard while she watched from her kitchen window, probably taking photos to send to the homeowner association. Ma'am, that would be a civil matter, Officer Rodriguez said to Karen. You would need to work that out between yourselves or contact your insurance company. This is ridiculous, Marcus muttered, running his hands through his hair. It is my property, my pool, my life. Karen stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. Maybe you should have thought about that before you started swinging that sledgehammer around like some kind of maniac. Some of us have standards to maintain. The words hit him like a physical blow. Standards to maintain, as if his personal tragedy was somehow lowering the tone of the neighborhood, as if his pain was an inconvenience to her perfectly manicured life. Officer Rodriguez was saying something about fines and city ordinances, but Marcus was not listening anymore. He was watching Karen's face, seeing the satisfaction in her pale blue eyes, the way she stood just a little straighter as she delivered what she clearly considered a killing blow. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that Marcus Rivera had spent 23 years as a construction foreman before switching to project management. He knew every building code, every permit requirement, every loophole in the city's regulations. He had torn down his pool without permits, not because he was stupid, but because he had been drowning in grief and had not cared about consequences. But he cared now. As Officer Rodriguez handed him a citation and Karen practically glowed with triumph, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. If Karen wanted to play games, if she wanted to use his lowest moment against him, then he would show her exactly what standards looked like. Officer, he said, his voice suddenly steady. I understand completely. I will make sure to get all the proper permits and follow every regulation to the letter. In fact, I think I will be doing some other home improvement projects as well, all perfectly legal of course. Something in his tone made Karen's smile falter just a fraction, but by then Officer Rodriguez was already walking back to her patrol car, and the moment passed as Marcus watched Karen retreat to her house. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number he had not called in over a year. When the voice answered, gravelly and familiar, Marcus smiled for the first time in months. Jimmy, it is Marcus. Yes, I know it has been a while. Listen, I need a favor. How would you like to make some easy money completely screwing over my neighbor? Jimmy Castellanos arrived at 6 a.m. sharp, his white pickup truck rumbling to life in Marcus' driveway just as the neighborhood was waking up. At 58, Jimmy was built like a fire hydrant, short, thick, and absolutely immovable when he set his mind to something. He had been Marcus' mentor when Marcus first started in construction, and there was not a building code in the city that Jimmy could not recite from memory. Jesus, Marcus, Jimmy said, surveying the demolished pool, you really went medieval on this thing. Marcus handed him a cup of coffee, steam rising in the cool morning air. I was not thinking clearly. Elena had just finalized the custody arrangement, and I just snapped. Jimmy nodded, understanding passing between them. Jimmy had been through his own messy divorce 15 years earlier. So what is the plan with this neighbor of yours? Karen, right? Karen Henderson. She has been a pain in my ass for 3 years, but yesterday she crossed a line. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Jimmy the photos he had taken of his property. Look at this fence line. Jimmy studied the images, his weathered face creasing into a frown. Son of a, she has got at least 18 inches of her fence on your property, maybe more. That is what I thought. But here is the kicker, look at her deck. Marcus swiped to another photo. See how it extends past her house. Jimmy's eyes widened. That overhang is definitely crossing the setback line. City requires 5 feet minimum from the property line for any permanent structure. He looked up at Marcus with growing admiration. You sneaky bastard. How long have you known about this? About 2 years. I have been letting it slide because I did not want neighbor drama while Sophia was still living here. But Karen just declared war. So Marcus shrugged. Game on. What do you need me to do? Marcus pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents. I need an official property survey done, by the book, completely legitimate. Then I need you to file complaints with the city about her violations. Jimmy flipped through the paperwork, property deeds, city planning documents, building permit records going back 20 years. Marcus, this is thorough. I have had a lot of sleepless nights since the divorce, gave me time to research. Marcus' voice carried a hard edge that Jimmy had never heard before. Karen wants to play the rules game, fine, but she is about to learn that I know the rules better than anyone. As if summoned by their conversation, Karen appeared at her kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching them with obvious suspicion. Marcus waved cheerfully, and she quickly stepped back from the window. She is paranoid, Jimmy observed. Good, paranoid people make mistakes. Speaking of mistakes, Marcus said, I need you to do something else. File for a permit to build a workshop in my backyard. Jimmy raised an eyebrow. You do not need a workshop. No, but I need the permit application process. It will require a property survey, environmental assessment, neighborhood notification. Marcus' smile was cold. All completely legal procedures that happen to be incredibly invasive for the neighbors. You magnificent bastard, Jimmy grinned. How big of a workshop? Maximum allowed by code without special approval, 20 by 30 feet, 16 feet ceiling height, and I want it positioned exactly 5 feet and 1 inch from Karen's property line. Jimmy whistled low. That is going to block a lot of her sunlight. Her precious garden is going to be in shadow for most of the day. Shame, Marcus said, not sounding sorry at all. They spent the next hour walking Marcus' property line, Jimmy taking precise measurements with a professional surveyor's tool. Every few minutes, they would see Karen's curtains twitch as she tried to spy on them from different windows. Marcus, Jimmy said as they worked, I've got to ask, you sure you want to do this? Once we file these complaints, there is no going back. The city does not mess around with property line violations. Marcus thought about Sophia, about the way Elena had used the pool as an excuse to limit his visitation. He thought about Karen's smug smile yesterday, the satisfaction in her voice when she had called him a maniac. He thought about all the nights he had lain awake, listening to Karen's dogs bark at 2 a.m., all the times she had left passive-aggressive notes about his grass being too long or his trash cans being out too early. I'm sure, he said. At exactly 9 a.m., Jimmy knocked on Karen's front door. Marcus watched from his kitchen window as Karen answered, her face shifting from annoyance to confusion to growing alarm as Jimmy explained he was conducting a property survey. I do not understand, Karen's voice carried across the yard. Why do you need to be on my property? Ma'am, according to county records, part of your fence and possibly your deck are on Mr. Rivera's property. We need to establish the exact property line. That is ridiculous. We had our property surveyed when we bought the house. Jimmy consulted his clipboard. That would have been 3 years ago. Property markers can shift, especially with soil erosion and weather. Mr. Rivera has the right to have his property line verified. Marcus could see Karen's hands trembling as she processed the implications. If her fence was on his property, she would have to move it. If her deck was over the setback line, the city could force her to tear it down. This is harassment, Karen said, her voice getting shriller. He is doing this because I called the police yesterday. Ma'am, this is a routine property survey. Mr. Rivera is within his rights. Jimmy's tone was professional but implacable. If you would prefer, we can have the city surveyor come out instead, but that would take several weeks and cost significantly more. Marcus watched Karen's face cycle through emotions, anger, fear, calculation. She was smart enough to realize that fighting the survey would only make her look guilty, but not smart enough to understand how thoroughly she had been outmaneuvered. Fine, she said finally, but I want to be present for every measurement. Of course, ma'am, that is your right. For the next 3 hours, Karen followed Jimmy around both properties like a suspicious cat, questioning every measurement, demanding to see his credentials, taking photos of everything. Marcus made a point of working in his garage with the door open, occasionally wandering out to offer Jimmy water or ask loudly about the survey results. Looking good, Jimmy, Marcus called out during one of these exchanges, "Find anything interesting?" Jimmy glanced at Karen before responding. "Well, the fence line is definitely off, looks like about 22 inches on your side, and that deck," he shook his head sadly, "whoever built that did not check the setback requirements." Karen's face went pale. "That cannot be right, we paid for professional installation." "Ma'am, I am just measuring what is here, these are the results." Jimmy showed her his clipboard. "The deck extends 4 feet 2 inches from your house, and the setback requirement is 5 feet from the property line. Your property line is 3 feet 8 inches from your house at this point." Marcus did quick math in his head. Karen's deck was violating the setback by almost 8 inches. In the city's eyes, that was a significant violation that could result in forced demolition. "This is insane," Karen said, her voice cracking. "We cannot tear down our deck, we just refinished it last summer." "That is between you and the city, ma'am," Jimmy said gently, "I just measure." As Jimmy packed up his equipment, Marcus joined them in the backyard. "So what is the verdict?" "I will have the official report ready by tomorrow," Jimmy said, "then it is up to you what you want to do with the information." Karen stood frozen by her deck, staring at the measurements Jimmy had spray painted on the ground. Her perfect little world was cracking and she could feel it. "Marcus," she said suddenly, her voice different, smaller, "can we talk privately?" Marcus studied her face, seeing fear where arrogance had been just hours before. "Of course, Karen, what is on your mind?" She glanced at Jimmy, who was loading his truck. I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot yesterday, maybe we can work something out." "Neighbor to neighbor." Marcus nodded slowly. "Maybe we can. But Karen," he stepped closer, his voice dropping to just above a whisper, "next time you want to call the cops on me, you might want to make sure your own house is in order first." The color drained completely from Karen's face as the full scope of her situation hit her. She had started a war with someone who had just proven he was better armed, better prepared, and far more ruthless than she had ever imagined. And the worst part was, he had not even played his strongest cards yet. 3 days later, Marcus was enjoying his morning coffee when he heard the shouting. Through his kitchen window, he could see Karen in her backyard, gesticulating wildly at a man in a hard hat who was shaking his head and pointing at various parts of her property. His phone buzzed with a text from Jimmy. "City inspector just arrived at Karen's, phase 2 is a go." Marcus stepped onto his back patio to get a better view. The city inspector, a heavy-set man named Rodriguez, whom Marcus had worked with on several commercial projects, was methodically documenting every violation Jimmy had reported. Karen's husband Bob had apparently been called home from work, his sedan was parked haphazardly in the driveway, and Marcus could see him through the kitchen window, pacing while he talked animatedly on his phone. "Mr. Rivera," a voice called from his front yard. Marcus walked around to find a young woman with a clipboard standing by his mailbox. "Sarah Chin, City Planning Department, I am here about your workshop permit application." "Perfect timing," Marcus said, smiling warmly. "Would you like some coffee? This might take a while." As Sarah documented his property for the workshop permit, they were joined by 2 more city employees, an environmental assessor and a neighborhood notification coordinator. It was standard procedure, but Marcus had timed it perfectly. Karen's property was crawling with city officials, and now his was too. To any observer, it would look like the entire block was under some kind of municipal investigation. "Jesus Christ, what is happening?" Bob Henderson appeared at the fence line, his tie loosened and his face red with stress. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing?" Marcus looked up from the site plans he was reviewing with Sarah. "Hey Bob, just getting some permits sorted out, how is your morning going?" "You know exactly how it is going." Bob's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "The city says we have to tear down our deck and move our fence, that is $15,000 minimum. That is rough, buddy." Marcus' tone was sympathetic, but his eyes were cold. "Maybe you should have had it surveyed properly when you built it." "We did have it surveyed." "By who?" Sarah Chin looked up from her clipboard, professionally curious. Bob faltered. It was 3 years ago, I would have to look up the company." Marcus already knew the answer. He had done his research. The Hendersons had used Bob's brother-in-law, who called himself a property consultant, but was not actually licensed to do surveys. It was cheaper than hiring a real surveyor, but the measurements were worthless from a legal standpoint. The thing is, Bob, Marcus said, when you are making permanent improvements to your property, you really need to make sure you are following all the regulations. I mean, what if something went wrong? What if someone got hurt because of an improperly constructed deck? The liability issues alone. Bob's face went through several shades of red. Are you threatening us? Of course not. I am just saying that as neighbors, we should all be responsible about following the rules. Speaking of which, Sarah, how is the soil assessment looking for my workshop? Sarah consulted her notes. The environmental impact should be minimal, but we will need to do a noise assessment since you are planning to use power tools. The notification requirements mean we will need to inform all neighbors within a 100-feet radius about the construction timeline. How long will construction take? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Based on the size and specifications, probably 4 to 6 months. You will be able to start at 7 a.m., Monday through Saturday, per city ordinance. Marcus saw Bob's expression darken further. 6 months of construction noise starting at 7 every morning, plus the shadow from the 16-feet-high workshop blocking their garden. And that was just the beginning. But Karen's voice called shrilly from their backyard. Bob, get over here, this inspector is saying we need to apply for a variance. Bob shot Marcus one more furious look before stalking back to his property. Marcus watched him go, then turned back to Sarah with a pleasant smile. Sarah, I am curious about something. If a neighbor wanted to file a complaint about my workshop during construction, what would happen? Well, they would need to prove you were violating city ordinances or the terms of your permits. As long as you are following the approved plans and staying within the noise regulations, there is not much they can do. She glanced toward the Henderson property, where voices were getting louder. Is there some kind of neighbor dispute going on? Nothing I cannot handle, Marcus said. Just want to make sure I am protected if someone tries to make false complaints out of spite. The city takes false complaints very seriously, especially if there is a pattern. Multiple frivolous complaints can result in fines for the complainant. Marcus filed that information away for later use. Good to know. Over the next hour, Marcus watched the situation next door deteriorate. The city inspector had found multiple violations beyond the fence and deck issues. The Hendersons' shed was too close to the property line, their air conditioning unit was positioned illegally, even their mailbox was 6 inches into the city's right-of-way. By noon, Karen was in tears. Marcus was cleaning up the remains of his demolished pool when he heard footsteps on his driveway. He looked up to see Karen approaching, her eyes red-rimmed and her usual perfect composure completely shattered. Marcus, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, please can we talk? He set down his shovel and gave her his full attention. Of course, what is on your mind? You know what is on my mind. She wrapped her arms around herself as if she was cold, despite the warm afternoon sun. The city says we are looking at maybe $30,000 in fines and reconstruction costs. Bob is talking about having to remortgage the house. Marcus nodded sympathetically. That does sound expensive. Please. The word came out cracked and desperate. I know I was wrong to call the police on you, I know I overreacted, but this is destroying our lives. Karen, I am not sure what you expect me to do. I did not make you build your deck in the wrong place. But you knew, did you not? You have known for years that our property was not properly surveyed. Marcus considered lying, but decided the truth would hurt more. Yes, I knew. Then why did you not say anything? Because it was not my problem. Just like my pool was not your problem until you decided to make it one. Karen stared at him, the full scope of her miscalculation finally becoming clear. You could have just gotten the permits for your pool demolition, this whole thing could have been avoided. You are right, Marcus agreed, but then I would have missed out on this valuable lesson about being careful who you mess with. Tears started flowing down Karen's cheeks. Bob does not know that I was the one who called the police. He thinks it was just bad luck that the city found all these problems right after your survey. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You did not tell your husband that you started this whole thing. He would kill me. He was already angry about the money we have been spending on the house, and now. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Marcus, I am asking you, please can we work something out? For a moment, Marcus felt a flicker of pity. Karen looked truly broken, And there was something sad about watching someone who had been so mean and small-minded reduced to begging. But then he remembered Sophia's empty bedroom, remembered Elena's hurtful words about his dangerous pool, remembered the happiness in Karen's voice when she had called him a maniac. "Here is what I am willing to do," he said finally. "I will wait before sending any more complaints about your property problems, but the ones that are already sent, those will continue." "What does that mean?" "It means you will have to fix the fence, and the deck, and the shed, and everything else the city found, but I will not go looking for more issues." Karen's face collapsed. "That is still going to cost us everything." "Karen," Marcus said softly, 3 days ago, you stood in my driveway and smiled while a police officer gave me a ticket. You called me a maniac. You tried to use my worst moment against me because you thought you had control over me." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "But here is what you did not understand. I have been building things and following city rules longer than you have lived in this neighborhood. When you decided to use the rules against me, you picked a fight with someone who knows the rules better than you ever will." Karen's shoulders shook with silent crying. "The difference between you and me," Marcus continued, "is that when I break the rules, it is because I am hurting and not thinking clearly. When you break them, it is because you are too greedy and proud to do things the right way. And now, you are learning that actions have results." He picked up his shovel and turned back to his work. "Oh, and Karen, building work on my workshop starts Monday at 7 a.m. I would suggest you buy some good earplugs if I were you." As Karen walked back to her house, Marcus allowed himself a moment of peace, but it was mixed with the thought that he was not done yet. Phase 3 was just starting, and Karen Henderson was about to learn that sometimes the best payback is perfectly, absolutely legal.